We'll go ahead. I'm going to get started and just into a presentation, and we'll just get on with this. And hopefully you'll have a good experience. You'll learn some things about growing vegetables. To me, this is one of the best things. Now, I did fail to mention a lot of our classes are focused on water supply, water conservation. It's to help you understand what you're doing in your landscape and how that translates into water use and water efficiency, with irrigation, plant selection, all this stuff. Vegetables is a whole unique category all by itself. And if you can understand and do these things effectively, of course, you're going to be a better water manager overall. So vegetables really doesn't have a lot to do with water conservation. Vegetables need sufficient water. They need plenty to grow and produce, but it's also a very beneficial use of water in a landscape in your yard. You're getting a crop out of that. You're getting produce out of that. It's edible. So there's really not a better use of your water as far as landscape irrigation goes. So with this, I want to start out just showing you a few things, maybe get you a little bit excited for the potential. You can grow. Now, some of you have some different climate zones, but assuming your climate zone is decent, some of you are in the upper Ogden valleys, you have a shorter growing season, but you can still grow almost any of the vegetables, at least the typical vegetables. If you get into some really unique things, you might have need an extended growing period and so forth. But you can grow anything and just look at the color, the varieties, the interest, of course, the taste. There's nothing better than harvesting your own fresh vegetables and bringing those in and using them right away. They're not transported, shipped anywhere. You don't have to worry about who's been involved with those or where they're grown. Once again, the color, the textures, just the overall quality of fresh produce out of your garden, you can't beat it. So I've just thrown these few slides in here to the beginning to just show you and hopefully get you excited, because what we're going to cover today really is just focusing on the very basics of getting it started now. We're still winter, but spring's right around the corner, so you can get a jump start on your garden today. And I threw this flowers one in there. Even though you're growing vegetables, sometimes it's okay, especially your vegetables are going to take sufficient water. The annuals are going to probably have that same volume. So if you love annuals, incorporate some of them into your vegetable garden rather than into your perennial flower beds. We like to talk about grouping similar plants with similar needs together. Well, vegetables and annuals, they can be watered together. They'll have a similar water need. You'll keep your annuals happy. Besides adding a little color to your vegetable garden, maybe you bring in some pollinators. There are the beneficial, certain flowers that are supposed to repel certain bugs. You can do it. That's a whole separate class, but it's fun. Throw a little color in there. So tonight, let's get on with the focus. We're gonna go through a little bit of planning, starting your plants from seed. I'm gonna show you some of that, talk about the lighting, soil, moisture, temperature needs, seed packet information, preparing the ground for when it's time to direct sow outside, and then some methods for protecting these things if you're really trying to get a little jump start early in the outdoors. So before you start though, I want you to think about a couple of things. Think about, of course, the vegetables you like to eat. Now, if some of you, I would love to be in a setting with all of you just in the classroom where we could say, raise your hand if you're brand new. And, are you brand new to gardening? This is the first time you've ever gardened and you're learning stuff, or if you've been doing this for years. Um, Hold on just a second. It looks like somebody says they maybe still have a little difficulty hearing. So give me one, I'm going to pause just for one more second. And oops, not that. Um, Give me another second here. Is that a little better? Brody, text me real quick if that seems a little better. Okay. All right. So back to where I was. Hopefully, again, everybody's hearing. I apologize. Sometimes the technology, sometimes the way we're dealing with stuff, it gets, we have the technical glitches in there. We'll get through this and hopefully you can hear, you can see, and you can get some understanding. But as I was mentioning, I love to just be in a classroom where I can actually gauge where you are so we can move and talk about the things you really need. But first of all, plan what you like to eat. I know some of you want to experiment, you want to try some new varieties, and that's great. If you've done gardening before, try those new varieties, experiment with some things that are different and unique. But if you've never done this before, focus on just the things you like to eat and don't try to get crazy on the first year. Get a little feel for things, get a little experience, and then year after year you're adding some different varieties, different cultivations, different things into your vegetable garden. With space, let's talk about space. You do have space. Everybody has a little bit of space. Now some of you may not realize you have space, but if you have a yard, you've got room. Now you may have to remove some grass, you may have to do something to create a better space for where you're going to grow your vegetables. Now some of you, if you don't really even have a yard, maybe you live in a townhome situation, HOA situation, apartment situations, you can do some of this limited growing in pots, even on a balcony. I'm not going to get into tons of that. I'm going to get into mostly starting seeds and how you get started early. We'll have another vegetable class that will focus on the other elements, raised beds and in-ground gardening versus pots. All those things are coming in the next class. So to avoid waste, also think about you're going to grow some stuff and you're going to probably end up with way more than you can eat. So think about who can I share this with? Do you have extended family? Do you have neighbors? Do you have friends? Is there a place you can take extra produce so that it's just not going to rot and go into the ground? Okay, so when you should start planning, that question, of course, is now. You're going to start planning right now. So what I'd like to do, excuse me, is now you don't have to write these down. I didn't mention at the beginning. This little webinar is being recorded, and so we'll post a video recording as well as just the slides on our website, in the next day or two. And so these resources, these slide sets will be there. You can go back and reference them. Now most of these are USU extension related resources, and I wanted to show you these really quick because they're very, very useful. A wealth of knowledge exists out there, way more than we could possibly cover in 1 hour. And so I'm going to pause this screen for just a minute, and then I'm going to share a different screen. Now this is on the internet. This is USU Extension's website. So it's USU Extension Yard and Garden. Okay, and on their Yard and Garden, if you are particularly interested in vegetables, which is what we're talking about tonight, they have, of course, trees and shrubs, they have lawn care, they have healthy soils, but this tab here, the fruits, vegetables, and herbs, so you can click in here and there's a little tab, a little colored picture of anything. So let's just say you want to grow broccoli. You can click on broccoli, it's going to give you a description. It's then all of these things here particular to broccoli: planting, irrigation, fertilization, harvesting, the varieties that are suitable for, here. Most of these are, of course, geared to Utah. And then some additional references of different things, potential problems you may have. So lots of information about the specific types of vegetables and things you can grow. So USU Extension, I wanted to show you that. And then in relation to this too, a lot of times there's pest and bug problems. Something's eating your vegetables and you don't know what it is. There's the Integrated Pest Management site, and it's just called IPM for short. You can get on an email list, but this IPM, this is the same site, USU Extension. I've just had these pre-open pages. You can get on their, I'm not going to go into it right now, but you can subscribe to their pest advisories. Notice on your screen you can subscribe. They'll send you a monthly email that outline. You can get on the vegetable IPM, the fruit IPM, the lawn IPM, and they'll send you an email every month or periodically quarterly, indicating what are the pests, what is the timing, and what are the treatment methods or the prevention methods for those particular pests. I bring that up now just because it's really important. If you're struggling, you don't know what to do, those are some great resources available to you. Okay, so let me get back to my slides. All right, so sorry, just got to click on this thing. All right, so with planning, really, really quickly, I'm going to show you. You don't have to do anything fancy here, but what I always like to recommend to people is keep a record. Now I have a little binder here. It actually looks pretty thick, This was given to me as a gift several years ago, and it just called the Garden Keeper. And inside here, there's lots of different tabs, and there's there's a bunch of stuff in here. But I keep a record of what I do, and you kind of think, well, I don't need that. I'll remember year to year what I'm doing. I'll remember what I planted. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I write down things like when the last frost date was for that year, and when it rained, if I can remember that. I write down things, the varieties I plant. I have a little map in there of my garden, and so as I'm moving things year to year, just any types of issues. If a year that I see, oh, this year I had real problems with tomatoes, um, and then the next year you don't. And so it's interesting as over time you start to notice trends, you start to figure out some problems, and you start to fix those problems because you simply wrote stuff down. So try that, write some things down, write down the locations. It's really good to move to what they call crop rotate. If you grow tomatoes in one spot one year, don't try not to plant them in that exact same spot the next year. If your space is just so tiny that you can't avoid it, just do what you can, but ideally you're moving these things around as you plant in the garden. Um, Again, I talked about weather, the frost dates, seed dates, and track your successes and failures. If you tried something one year and it just didn't work out, don't give up. It may be just that year. I've had years where I can't get a zucchini to grow. It's really weird because zucchini grows anywhere, right? It's a cursed plant and you produce so much zucchini, you can't do anything with it. But I've had years where it won't grow. And then I've had years where tomatoes just struggle. And everybody's probably had those years. So cucumbers one year, I couldn't get them to grow. And then the next year, you got cucumbers everywhere. So it's sometimes you might think it's you and it's not you. All right. So gardening is going to get into your blood. If you're new to this, it's going to get into your blood. You're going to love it. It's not going to be a chore. You're going to enjoy being out there. You're going to enjoy being in the dirt. You're going to just love this. So here's just an example layout. This goes with the planning. Draw a little thing. It doesn't have to be fancy like this. It doesn't have to be colored. Mine's not colored. I just pencil sketch in my basic size, draw where the rows are, where I figure I'm going to plant stuff that year. And I can look back year to year and see where everything was so that I am able to rotate crops effectively and look at the problems. I also keep a little list of seeds I need to order. If I've run out of seed, I make a note. Oh, you need to order tomatoes this year. You need to order cucumbers. You need to order something, whatever it is, or buy them if you're going to order them online or buy them. If you're doing square foot gardening or raised bed gardening, same thing. Just draw it out. Figure out where you're going to put stuff. Get those in. It makes it a little bit fun, but it also makes it easy to track stuff and know your successes. And here's a couple pictures again of space. You can really plant vegetables anywhere. If you're watching, if you know about the soil conditions, you know about the temperatures. One of these is actually a picture in my father-in-law's basement. He's got some grow lights set up, and he can grow. He's growing lettuce all year long. Enough lettuce to make salads. A daily salad. You've got that growing. You can grow them in pots. There's a lot of things you can do if you're really into it. You want to spend a little time, a little money, effort doing that. You can do it. All right, so now let's shift gears out of planning. If you have some questions about that, ask them, but if not, we'll keep moving because there's a lot to talk about. So why start plants from seed? This class is focused on the jump start. Right now, we're entering that period of, if you can't go buy nursery plants right now, you can't go buy tomato plants right now, and you wouldn't want to. What would you do with them? But if you're interested in growing your own, we're approaching that time. You can start those seeds now. Save yourself maybe a little money, depends, and just get excited and watch these things grow from the seeds. So maybe it'll save you money, maybe it won't. Depends on how much you want to invest on lights and trays and soil media. And seeds are relatively inexpensive. You can buy a whole packet of seeds, for a couple of dollars. Depends on what they are, what the brand, so forth. But one of the benefits of growing your own is you can increase the varieties that are available to you. Nurseries are pretty limited. They're going to sell you some main varieties and they'll have quite a few options. But if you want heirloom seeds or some different things, they're not going to have all of those varieties. So if you find, especially through mail order or special seed exchange groups, there's some seed exchange groups online. There's some local ones here in Utah. There's resources to find those through USU. there are seed exchanges where people are really specializing in certain types and varieties of things that you just can't find everywhere. And so you can sometimes even choose your seed source. If you're concerned about where those seeds are originally grown, by starting your own, you can find seeds that are maybe sourced locally and then buy those seeds. And so one of the things though is just satisfaction, the pleasure of starting your own plants, working with these little green plants in the winter. It starts to get exciting, the dull gray and the dirty snow of winter starts to wear on you in February, even though we need it. We need the snow, we need the moisture. Um, Starting these little green plants and watching them grow, that's kind of exciting. It makes you feel like spring is coming, and it is, but it helps it move a little faster, at least to me. Um, Experimentation is part of the fun. And then one of the big reasons for me is you don't necessarily become dependent upon the availability of produce in the stores. If you can produce your own produce, granted it's a limited season, but if you know how to preserve some of those things, save some, bottled, dried, whatever you do, you can have fresh produce for quite an extended period of the year and only have to buy fresh produce at the store for a few months of the year. So now let's get into the requirements for success. And this is where I'm going to probably switch in and out of different things, different slides, and start showing you some things. One is proper growing media. It's knowing how to start. So let me quickly review these 8 things, and then I'm going to pause and I'll show you some things here. The containers, the viable seeds, proper timing, amount of light, proper day and night temperatures, right amount of water, and proper hardening. Okay, so let's kind of start. Let's start talking about media. Now, many options. One thing you didn't know is you're really not using soil. When you want to start your own seeds, you're using a soil mix. They call it a soil mix, but it's not soil. It's usually compost, vermiculite, peat moss, perlite, coconut coir, sometimes worm castings. I don't see that too often. The majority is compost, vermiculite, and peat moss or perlite. And if you want to mix your own, you could buy all those ingredients separately and mix it all up in a bucket or bin or something, and you could essentially mix your own potting mix. And some nurseries do this. They buy all those ingredients and they then mix and then actually sell their own brand of potting mix. And some of it's really great. Store purchase, there's lots of options. Miracle Grow, Jiffy, Burpee, all these things. To me, I'm not going to try to sell you on a product. Some of you will know some are better than others. Um, I'm not here to have a conversation about which one's necessarily the best. Sometimes the nursery specific mixes end up being a little better, but they also may end up costing you a little more. But I've used Miracle Grow. I've used the Jiffy organic little seed starting mix in the bags, germination mixes. They're all just fine. At least, I mean, they seem fine for just starting your seeds, getting them going. So one thing to realize though is soil mixes must be loose, they must be fertile and disease free. Most of the soil mixes you buy are sterilized, so they're not going to come with pathogens, they're not going to come with viruses or fungus. Now fungus spores kind of are everywhere, so if you get a little mold growing, doesn't necessarily mean it came with the soil. It could just come drifting through the air a little bit. Mold spores float, and then it could have started in the soil because it's moist and warm. Don't use garden soil. Don't go out and just dig up soil and save it. It's heavy for one thing, a little too heavy, and you could then introduce pathogens into the brand new seedlings. Your soil could have some things in it that would affect the brand new seedling growth. I've seen people do it, and it can work. If that's all you've got and that's what you can do, then you work with what you can. But if you can avoid it, use something light. Use a soil mix. Um, Typically, the soil mixes they come a little bit dry, and some of them get a little hydrophobic, meaning they don't absorb water really well. So ideally, before you plant, mix water into that soil media and let it soak up water, and then let it kind of drain out a little bit before you actually plant in it. So I do have, I know the screen's gonna be really small. I have a little pot here with some soil in it, and I pre-mixed it. But you got it's loose, it's crumbly. You can work with that real easy. just let it soak up a little bit first, and then you don't have to worry about planting your seed and trying to get water in there when it just doesn't really want to soak up the water, and your seed actually just sits in a little dry pocket and never gets wet. That's not going to help germination. So most home gardeners, they're simply going to buy a mix, and they're going to start with that. That's the easiest. I would recommend if you haven't done this a lot and you don't want to bother mixing your own, or you're not doing a ton of it, just simply buy a little bag, um, use that, or a couple options I'm going to show you. I've got a couple pictures here. Um, let's go to this picture here, and then I'll jump back to that one. So peat pellets. I've got one here. So they're flat and compressed. They're hard. And I hope you can see this on your screen. Maybe what I'll do, let me do this for a second. Let me just stop sharing this. And then you'll be able to see this a little better. So this little peat pellet, it's a compressed little disc. When you soak that up with water, I've got one here that I've just barely soaked up with water. When you soak that up with water, this turns into this, okay? And so you've got, now it's soft, it's all hydrated, and so this became this. Now this is still pretty small. It's actually, this is only about, what do you say, an inch and a half in diameter, and it's only about an inch and a half tall. But, and there's usually a little preformed indent here. But what I like to do with these, if I use them, and I have used these to start some seedlings, and so I usually just use a little toothpick, and you can just help make a tiny little hole here, kind of peel back. These come in a little fabric, so I kind of peel back the fabric just a little bit, and I can help make a little hole, and then I can put the seed, I can just tuck the seed down, whatever it says on the seed packet. If it says 1/4 of an inch, just put that down there, a little 1/4 of an inch, and then scrape a little bit of the soil back on there. You don't have to pack it down tight or anything, but you can just put it in there. That's one way to do it. The other way is, like I mentioned, you can get little containers, lots of containers. That's what we're going to focus on here for a second. There's an empty one. Notice there is drainage. Ideally, any container you use should have drainage. These two are exactly the same. Has holes in the bottom so water can drain out. This one actually has soil in it now, as I showed you. So you could use something like this, same concept. You can just use a toothpick, scratch a little hole in there, put some seed. You could put 1 or 2 seeds in here if you're willing to transplant one of them out later. As they start growing, 2 would be too many. They'd start crowding each other as they get a little taller before you're going to transplant them in the garden. But if you use this is not going to be sufficient for your little seedling until you plant it outside. You're going to need to transplant this into a container like this or something a little bigger, depending on how early you get started and depending on what it is you started. Now, something like this, if you want to start your pumpkins and watermelons and the larger seeds, I would recommend probably not using these. The seeds are quite large, so they need to be in there a bit. And this just isn't quite sufficient. So if you're going to start the big seeds, I would say start them in something with a little more soil, a little more media to get started with in the beginning. So just so you don't run into problems, run into the challenges of not having enough media to grow in. Okay, so let's get back to here. So this was another slide I had there with containers. Some of you have seen the little square peat containers. One thing I would suggest, if you're using those little jiffy pots or those, is before you transplant them, even with these little guys with the fabric, I like to take that fabric off of there carefully because your roots can start growing through it. They say this is all biodegradable and break down, but I have planted these intact like this, and then by the end of the season, yeah, the plant's huge, but this is not degraded. It's still there and it's kind of wrapped around certain roots. So the peat containers and those, anything with little fabric, I like to carefully remove those before I put them into another container or into the ground because they're really not going to break down like you would expect them to. Get rid of those so your roots can expand. They can get out into the regular soil once you put them in the ground. But then also notice, I'm going back to the slides, also notice you could use plastic cups, paper cups. If you use plastic cups, poke a little hole in the bottom and then put them in a tray of some sort. I've got a tray I'm going to stop sharing again here for a second. I've got a tray here. So, this is one example. And you can buy these, or just like it showed in that picture, use an aluminum, disposable aluminum pan or something. So this one's just a couple inches thick. It has a cover, so ideally, you can use these. You can keep the cover. The cover lets the light in. It also keeps the moisture, the humidity in there, so it keeps them moist longer. Instead, they will still dry out. You need to watch the water, but um, but that will help them stay moist as you're trying to germinate and get your seedlings started. All right, so let's let's move on again here. Couple more examples of containers. There's lots of different things. Toilet paper tubes people have used, they cut them in half so they're a little shorter. They fill them with soil mix. Egg cartons, anything you can use anything to get them started. They're not they're not if they're small, they're just not going to carry very far. Once that seedling is up, you're going to have to transplant it over into something that'll be a little bit better soil media until, again, you're ready to get these things out into your garden. If you buy if you buy the seed starting kits, they'll come with the little plastic trays, as you see on the in the left of the slides, with the seeds and the little soil mix and stuff. They'll come with some little seed starter, the plastic trays. Many of you are familiar with those in the nurseries and stores. You'll see the little plastic trays with 6 plants in them. A lot of times that's how you buy your vegetable starts. So let me show you. I have here a couple of examples before we move on to seed packets. So just preparatory for this class, I've got these peat pellets. Now this is a good example. I'll try to hold these up. This one here that I'm moving, this is a tomato plant. Now it's just popped up. It's got its little the new little cotyledon leaves on there. Hasn't actually formed true leaves yet. But notice, let me set this one down. Notice here by my thumb, there's already a little root sticking out of here. And look at the size of this guy. It's tiny, but it's already got a root. So it's doing a lot of root growth at the same time it's doing some upward growth. These these here are radishes. Now, normally you'd never start radishes indoors. I did it because I know radishes germinate quickly, and I wanted to show you something, growing. Notice again here, the roots, they're protruding out of there. So if I try to peel off this fabric, I have to be really careful or I am going to break those roots off when they're like this. So a lot of times I'm once these are up this big, that's where I want to, before it gets too many roots all tangled up in this mesh, this is where I'm transplanting this guy into this pot at about this stage. So I'm not destroying a lot of roots. It's up. Now it's ready to go in here. But to get these started, I can get a whole lot more of these into a tray to just get the seeds started and then transplant them into bigger containers. Some people may want to skip that step just because, it's one more step, but that's what I typically do, and I enjoy doing it. I don't mind messing in the dirt and doing that kind of stuff. So it's kind of fun for me. So, all right, let's talk about seed packets for a minute and get into some seed viability. Wait, maybe this is a good place. I see there's maybe just a couple of questions. Um, this might be a good place to break for some questions. Um, okay, one of them is a good place to buy seeds. The other is about germination. I'm going to talk about both of those in just a second, right now. So, seeds and seed packets. Ideally, you're using a high quality seed. Now, that means it's just from a reputable source. It comes in a seed packet. The seed packet has information and it has a date as far as when the seed was packaged, for which year, and a lot of times they even say where they're from. Many companies, there are lots to choose from online. I'm going to go through this slide just a little bit and then I'm going to pause again and show you some stuff here. There's local sources and local nurseries that sell seed, and some of them have their own brand. They'll just buy seed in bulk from a supplier and then they'll package that on their own and sell it with their own brand on it. Um, a lot of times if you're ordering online, you'll need to order quite early. January is a time to order your seeds. Sometimes it'll take a few weeks to get there. you know, you'll get them in a month or whatever. So January, February is a time to order them. And um, if you haven't ordered them yet, it's not too late. You could order them now if you like to do mail order stuff, and I'll show you a couple things there. One thing you want to do though is always check for the varieties for days to harvest to make sure that's going to work where you are. Like I mentioned, the upper valleys, Ogden valleys, higher elevations in Utah, you've got a much shorter growing season. So if you need longer than you normally have, you're going to have to probably not grow that particular crop or look for a variety that has a shorter, maybe they're not as big. Maybe you've got pumpkins that don't get huge, that's really small, but they are harvestable and ripe in a much shorter window, right? So let me, whoops, here we go. Let me pause for just a second again. And I want to show you. So if you ever mail order anything, okay, here's a, oh, this is just a few seed catalogs. You'll get, if you ever order, you'll be on somebody's list, and I think every seed company must be related. They're all cousins because they love to, now they just sell each other's information. And so they'll sell a name list to somebody else. And you got all kinds of companies that will send you a seed catalog. They'll, and in those seed catalogs, you've got a million choices. And some of them are quite thick. Like this is a really thick catalog with tons of information and lots of stuff in here. These I like to get these because they're actually a great source of information. You can read through, not everybody wants to sit and spend time reading through them, but if you have a question and you're looking just at corn, there's a lot of good information there about corn and sweet corn and the varieties and the different, why they do different things with different ones, the SH and what those stands for and some of that kind of stuff. So while I'm here though, I'm going to talk about seed packets. As I mentioned, here's one. This happens to be from J&J. So they've packaged this all up. They've got some things here, and then on the back they've got information. This says it was packaged for year 2012, and I still have it. I'm going to talk about viability in just a second. You know, most seed packets, they have some nice colorful something, the brand name on them, and then on the back, that's where they're going to have the useful information. Usually this kind of a graph here is going to show you and tell you how to plant this, the care. It's going to tell you how deep, the distance between seeds, and the harvest time, how many days to harvest. A lot of that information is right on the back of the seeds, and so it makes it easy. Whether you're starting indoors or sowing directly in the ground, it makes it easy to know, okay, I've got a packet of seeds. This packet says if it's small seeds, it'll do a row of 100 feet, say carrots or radishes or some of those kind of things. They're not always counting the seeds in some of those really tiny seeds. But if it's big seeds, they'll say, oh, you got 50 seeds, plant 3 seeds per hill. Say you're doing pumpkins or squash, 3 seeds per hill, spread them out 4 feet or 3 feet. A lot of that information is just right on the packet. And so it's really good information. You can buy all kinds of, you can buy different brands, different things. This one has a little window in it where you can actually see the seeds inside here. Some of them will do that. Some of them are just in a kind of a regular paper little thing. Occasionally, you can also find seeds. This one happens to be like a little pepper. You can find seeds that are coated or pre-treated. Some people will not like that, and some people will. The pre-treated seeds means they've got something on them that will prevent bugs from eating them. You see corn a lot of times pre-treated. Um, Different squash, cucumbers have come pre-treated. This pepper one, it's actually not treated for bugs, but this one's just pre-treated with, it says it's extra nutrients, helps absorb the moisture, and kind of helps speed up germination according to what they say, which is why these seeds, if you look at those are pepper seeds, but they're pink. Now, if you know about pepper seeds, you've opened a pepper. Pepper seeds are not pink. They're a yellow, kind of creamy, whitish yellow color. So these have a treatment on them. And that's pros and cons. As you're ordering or buying seeds, you can just know and look for those kinds of things and be aware of them. Okay, so let's go back. I'm going to go back to my slides and we'll continue. We'll answer those questions though about viability and where to buy seeds. You can buy them anywhere. Buy them at nurseries, buy them online. A lot of local sources, seed exchanges if you want some specialty seeds or heirloom seeds. So on the while we're talking about seed packets, it will tell you the days to germinate, days of germination, and then when you can sow them outside or how early before the last frost. So in our, let's say where I am, the typical last frost date is around Mother's Day. Let's say it's May 10th. If my seed packet says I can sow directly in the soil, you know, at frost or wait until frost is passed, then I should wait until Mother's Day before I probably put those in the ground because potentially they'll pop up and we'll get a frost and they'll die unless I protect them. But a lot of them also say starting indoors, days to germination or starting indoors, and they'll say 45 days or 40 days or 30 days before last frost. So all you have to do is kind of figure out when's my last frost, count backwards and say, okay, I can plant these, I can start these indoors. They'll be at a decent size to be planted directly outside by the time it frost or by the time we're frost free. And that's kind of how you can gauge when you're starting. Or if you don't want to even do that math, you don't want to bother with that, figure you can start a lot of this stuff in February if you don't mind holding on to it a little bit and you don't mind maybe protecting it a little bit or don't mind getting a little bit bigger plants and transplanting them to bigger containers to hold until you're able to get them in the garden. And some people, that's why they buy starts, is because they can go to the nursery and they can buy this giant tomato plant that's, already a foot tall and put it in the ground right at Mother's Day and it's off and going. You could do that at home too. You just need to start a little earlier and you'll end up with that big plant. So let's talk about light requirements and moisture requirements. Let me see. I think I've actually got a slide. No, we'll get to that. So when you're starting seeds indoors, they don't need light to germinate. So don't think, oh, I got to put all these seeds in the ground and put them in a bright spot. They will need light the second they poke through the soil, but they do not need light to germinate. They need it moist, and typically a lot of the vegetable seeds like the soils warmer. And I'll show you a slide here about warming and maybe how to deal with that artificially at home, indoors. But as long as the soils are warm, as long as the soil's moist, mostly the conditions are prime. The seed, if it's only buried to the right depth, it'll grow and pop up and just take off as it should. The spacing and planting depth, that's really for outside. If you're gonna sow directly outside, then just follow the packet and plant them the right spacing and the right depth in your actual soil, and you should be successful. Occasionally, with very very small seeds, you're sprinkling them out there, and then you may have to thin them once they pop up. So let's move ahead here. Seed viability and storage. So now hopefully you're learning a bit about the seeds, you know what you want to grow, you're even purchasing them. Now you're thinking, well, I'm buying a package of seeds that contains 25 or 50 seeds. I'm only going to need 3 plants. I've got a small family or whatever, or I don't love these that much, but I like them a little. I'm only going to grow 3 jalapeno plants or one. But you've got a seed packet of 25. How do I store these so that I don't have to buy a new packet of 25 only to grow 1 or 2 seeds? So ideally you store them in a cool, low humidity place. If you've got a basement, it's a great place to store seeds. Put them in a storage room where it's fairly consistent temperature most of the year, especially in the summer. It's not getting really hot. And, the heat tends to probably affect them more than the cold. You can if the less oxygen, the better. Put them in a Ziploc bag, try to get all the air out of that, cool temperatures, dry. They're going to store longer. Some people say you can vacuum pack them and freeze them, dig them out once a year, go through them, get what you need, put them back in the freezer. They will last longer with less oxygen and cooler temperatures. If you're going to store, if you're going to store them, just know those needs, and then you can have seeds. I've had seeds that are well over 10 years that still germinate. Um, Recent changes in the economy, of course, have stirred a lot of interest in this. And so I don't know what the seed supplies are, and year to year they could vary. It's always nice, I think, to have at least a couple years worth of seeds. And so if something happened, you couldn't get seeds one year, you at least have some left over from the year before. And so then, or 2 to 3 years at least. So If you're harvesting seeds from your own produce, keep in mind that cross pollination could have happened, so you may end up with something slightly different than the original. This happens with tomatoes, it happens with squash related plants. You just get some cross pollination. You'll still get, let's say in the case of tomatoes, you'll still get a tomato. It may just have some slightly different characteristics than the original that you planted the first year from a seed that you purchased. Some people get really good at this with heirloom seeds, and they can continue to perpetuate those heirlooms over year after year after year and save the seeds, and they get the same thing. But if you're saving your own seeds, just be considerate of that. That you may end up with a little different qualities. I will tell you though, you can test your own germination and seed viability. Okay, so especially larger ones. So I'm going to just show you a picture of this. You just take a few seeds, you wrap them up in a paper towel, get them moist, get the paper towel moist. You can put them in a Ziploc bag and then put them somewhere warm. Put them in the sun, put them on top of the refrigerator. It gets a little bit of heat up there. Within just a few days, the germination time period for these seeds, you'll see them start to germinate. And then you can count. You don't do this with your whole seed packet, although you could, and then you could just take those and plant them all into, starter mix or plant them directly in the ground. But ideally, you're just taking a few seeds of the seed packet. You're testing the germination rate to see if the packet is still viable. So you can put out a bunch of seeds, 10 maybe. If you have a packet of 50 seeds, choose 10 of them, choose 8 of them. Put them in the wet paper towel, let them sit. And then if all 8 germinate, there's a high likelihood that, of course, the whole seed packet is probably good. You may have 1 or 2 that aren't good. If you only have 1 of the 8 germinate, you're risking planting all of those seeds in your garden or trying to start them all because only a few of them may still be viable. So it's better off if you do that kind of test, you'll know, oh, you know what, this seed packet is not good anymore. I should just get a new seed packet. I'll buy some new ones. I'm dealing with old seed here. I only had 1 out of 8 germinate, 1 out of 10. It's not going to be worth it. Get rid of those. So that's a way you can test your germination at home to see if your seeds are still good. Just take a few of them out of the packet and do that test. So let's talk about then once seeds are planted, um, generally, I mean, the needs of seeds. Almost all the vegetables, as I mentioned, they don't need light upon germination and they don't need scarification. But if you're kind of just talking seeds in general, some seeds need all kinds of conditions. Some seeds need to go through an animal's intestinal system before they'll germinate. Some seeds need to go through a fire. There's certain evergreens in the forest. They need to go through a fire before those seeds will actually germinate. They they have a coating on them. They need to be scarified and scratched. Some need an extended cold period before they'll germinate. For most part, the vegetables, they they just, you're going to put them in the ground. They're going to be ready to go. They don't need light to germinate. They just need the other conditions of temperature, the right temperature of the soil, and the moisture levels. So most vegetables, as I mentioned, are just that way. Read the instructions on the seed pack. Some seeds will do best directly seeded into the soil. I've started these radishes in here, but honestly, radishes are pretty easy. Direct seed those. Spinach, you direct seed. Carrots, you direct seed. Even for the most part, I know you can buy corn starts. I've seen them at nurseries. I've never tried to start corn. I don't think it's worth it to try to start it and transplant every individual corn plant. Peas are the same way. Beans are the same way. Some are just better direct sowed into the soil. Don't try to start those indoors. Now, seed viability charts. How long is it going to take a vegetable? How long is it going to last? These charts, I believe, I'm not sure who created them. I've found them at various websites. Utah State has one. I think they just err on the side of caution based on, again, testing and seeing the percentages. And I think they figure at a certain threshold of 60% not germinating, well, call it good, and you just need new seeds. Like I said, though, I've had seeds last, depending on the types. I still have seed packets from 2010, in 2012. Some of those I'm not using, I'm replacing. For whatever reason, I haven't thrown them away, and I don't know. I guess in my head it's like, I can't throw those seeds away, and I should just do it. But notice the numbers on here. Some of these say carrots 3 years, corn 2 years. I've had corn 3 or 4 years that still germinates. Um, Beans, peas is one. I've had pea seeds that have been just 3, 4 years old and they don't germinate as well. You definitely see a reduction. So there's certain things that you should probably just be watching and keeping an eye on as they get old. Get new ones. Here's another seed viability chart. Every one you see is going to be a little different, it seems. But you can generally take them for what they say, but doesn't mean that after 2 years you need to throw all your pepper seeds away. Keep them. You can try them the third year. Do that germination test I talked about, and likely if they're stored properly, you can get extended years out of those, even up to 4, 5, 6 years before you need to buy new. Especially like I said, you're only planting a few of them. Your seed packet's going to last you several years. Um, Extending to 10, like I said, I have maybe a stretch. You don't need to go like that. You can just get some new seeds. Then you can try new varieties as well. So let's talk about planting time. I kind of mentioned this already a little bit ago. So it's important to know the date of the last spring frost. Now, it's getting more and more that we'll have kind of extreme weather. So we could have a frost in these northern Utah valleys in June. It's happened before, it could happen again. But we're talking about general, what the typical frost-free date is. And for northern Utah Wasatch Front, generally it's Mother's Day, May 10th. For the upper valleys and other locations throughout the state, Salt Lake County is even warmer. So if you live in Salt Lake area, you can bump that up maybe a week. I'll show you a little bit of some tricks though. If you want to get started outside a little early, there's some methods you can do that without really worrying too much about that last frost. But count back from that date. That's when you know when to start indoors. And then some varieties, of course, are going to take more time. Peppers, they can take about 3 weeks to germinate, 14 to 21 days. So know that. On the seed packet, it's going to tell you that. If it takes 3 weeks to germinate and then you still have 4 weeks to grow it to a sizable transplant size, that's 7 weeks before the frost date, which, you know, it's now for some of these. You can get started right now. Um, Light requirements. I've already talked about this, so I'll just, excuse me, I'll just skip ahead here a little bit. Once the plants have germinated, though, they do need lots of direct light. This is why one of the challenges of starting your own seeds indoors is this time of year, our day length isn't that long. And so unless you use some grow lights, a lot of times the seedlings, they're stretching for light. This little guy that I showed you, I've just got him in a windowsill on the south side. So it's getting some good direct light in the day, but that good direct light is only starting at 8 a.m. I mean, it's getting lighter, but it's not good sunlight. We got 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., which seems like a lot of time. But on new seedlings, you can have good direct light on them 14 to 16 hours. They still like a dark period in the day, but you can get good direct light on them for 14 hours and they're going to thrive. It's going to make nice, strong transplants, proper proper growth. But if all you have is the windowsill, you don't have the time or money to invest in grow lights, it'll still work. I've done it. I've done it for multiple years. You still get some transplants. They get a little leggy. They get a little bit longer and skinnier, looking for light, searching for light. And it's usually something you can't really reverse that. But once you get them transplanted outside, they tend to thicken up and kind of go like the rest. So um, don't worry too much, although if you can, get them more light. You can set up yourself some grow lights, you can buy them. If you use grow lights or some sort of lighting, put the light right down, right at the level. Even some of these pictures, the light is up above, quite a ways above. Put that light right at the tops of the leaves of whatever it is. And then ideally you're adjusting the light as the plants grow. So as the plant gets taller, the light is moving up as well. But that light needs to be just right above them. The further the light away, the leggier your plants get. So get the direct light right on top of them. I've already showed you this. Look, you can grow a zucchini plant under light. You can grow tomatoes under lights. Um, there's a lot of stuff you can do. The grow light technology is there. If you decide to have some major operation, you may get questioned by local authorities to find out what you're really growing. So be careful there. And consider your power bill. You're running some lights, you're going to have extended lighting on, your power bill will go up. So consider that. I've already talked about moisture a little bit. Be careful not to have too much. Um, if your soil is constantly just soggy, your little seedlings won't do as well. They still need airflow, they need moisture, but they don't want a swamp. You can end up with fungal issues, and you can end up with a problem they call damping off, which is a fungal problem. It just kind of rots the base of your seedling and it'll kill it. So be very careful with moisture requirements. Temperature requirements, of course, daytime temperatures between 60 and 80 degrees. Um, your seedlings, nighttime temperatures can be a little cooler. Soil temperature should be 50 to 85 degrees. So some people, to warm up their soil, they'll use a heating pad, they'll use rope lights. Those can be on all the time. Remember, when the seeds are barely starting, they don't need the light, but they need the warmth. So if you want to go to that extent to warm up the soil just a little, don't cook them. Don't turn that thing up to, make 100-degree soil, but just to warm the soil enough, it'll increase germination times and speed up that germination. Once they're germinated, you don't really need those heating elements anymore. They're going to need just more light. Of course, the soil temperature needs to stay warm. You just need a little bit more light to get going after that. So here's to show you kind of what happens with lighting and temperature. Temperatures are too warm, they can create rapid growth. And so the picture with the tomato on the left, it was maybe too warm or not enough light, and so it's a little more spread out, but look, it is bigger. And so some people might say, well, it's a bigger plant, I want that one. The one on the right, it's a little stockier, shorter, but look how dense and thick it is. That was probably grown in lower temperature range. Sometimes in the greenhouses, they'll keep it a little bit low. They'll keep it at 60, 65, 68 degrees. Soil temperatures are warm to germinate it, but the air temperatures are cool, and so it slows the growth a little and makes a very nice, sturdy, stocky plant. So that's something to consider as well. And granted, you're not going to be like a greenhouse production. You don't have time to do all that, or the means. So you do what you can. You put it in a windowsill, and you're just monitoring to make sure it doesn't dry out. And that's probably the extent of what you're going to do. So here's something that's very important. If you're going to start indoors and get a jump start, you got to know how to harden these things for transplanting later. It's called hardening off. And basically what you do, you're taking these little seedlings that have been in your house at 68 to 75 degrees, however you keep your house, and you're going to throw them outside into the extreme elements where the temperatures could be a little higher than that or very much lower than that, with wind and very direct, no blocking of sun through a window or anything. You're throwing these outside, they're not going to handle that well unless you gradually ease them in. You harden them off. So this prepares the tender leaf tissues to tolerate the environment, and it can take maybe a couple of weeks. You start when they're 4 to 6 inches tall and they have 4 to 6 leaves. Again, that's going to vary. And what you do is just place them outside for a couple hours and then bring them back in. And just kind of do this. Now, of course, if you're working all day and all this stuff, you could still do it. When you get home from work, stick them outside so they're out. Maybe they have a little breeze, the temperatures are a little cooler. Uh, don't stick them out if it's freezing outside, if you're snowing or frost, but stick them outside, let them start getting climatized to the outside environment. And then over the course of a couple weeks, you're extending that period. You're working your way up a little more time each day, a little more time until they can be outside pretty much all day. Even without transplanting them yet, they're outside, they can tolerate the elements, then they're ready to transplant. It'll prevent the shock, the wilt, death of your seedlings. Many people have done this. They've started indoors and they just transplant them right outside, and it's just a little too harsh of extremes in that transplant process, and your plants die within just a couple days. So um, do protect them from really extreme wind and sun at first, and keep them moist. But if you've hardened them off properly, usually the plants are going to be just great. To help in that hardening off process, some people will use cold frames or special shade cloth fabric. It's not required, but if you plan to leave these outside at night, not actually planted in your garden, these are some great ways to do that. During the day you prop it open so it doesn't get too hot in there, but at night you can actually close the lid, and keep them warm, keep them, nice, so that you're not having any issues that way. So that's one way to do it, building a cold frame. If you don't have that, this is a this is an actual garden that's more along its grow. You can see how big those plants are. But you could use a special spun bonded polyester fabric. It's special fabric for gardens to cover them. This will actually help keep bugs off. It filters the light a little bit, and it moderates temperatures in there a little bit. If your plants really aren't ready to be transplanted, and you don't have some protection for them, bring them in at night. Just bring them in and put them back outside at night. Then you don't risk any potential frost that you didn't expect, or other damage, or who knows, insects, bugs, animals, somebody eating them. Um, Now, as they get big enough, you've hardened them, but you want to get a jump start. You don't want to wait till May 10th to get these outside. You can protect these plants, get them transplanted into your garden, but protect them. Some of you are familiar with these things that you see here, the wall of water. Each of those little cells is filled with water. Water is it absorbs heat, and it takes a while to get that heat off of it at night. And so it's keeping that little plant in its own little greenhouse, keeping it nice and warm. I've used these. I've actually had the water in them freeze, but the plant is fine. I've planted tomato plants outside as early as, maybe I shouldn't say it, as early as about April 10th, between April 10th and April 15th, about a whole month early. And I've used the wall of waters to protect them. And so by May 10th, they're just like this picture. They're poking out of the top of that thing. So if you get a frost, anything outside of that protection would get frosted and die. So you would want to be careful with that. You could use milk jugs, a bottle of water, anything that absorbs a little heat and then lets some of that heat off at night would do the same thing. Or just simply a cover, anything you can cover them. Some people, they've planted their vegetables, their plants out in the regular garden. There's a risk of frost. They take buckets and just go cover everything for the night. Once the sun comes up the next day, they take all those buckets off, and the plants are fine. It just keeps the frost off. Here's another picture. You can see in the background, peas are up, spinach are up. Those are not affected by frost. And I'm going to talk about some of those things that you can sow directly in the ground early. But the warmer season, the tomatoes and peppers, those kind of squashy plants, any of the squash relatives, you would need to protect them until you're out of frost danger. Okay. So let's talk about those now. The cool season crops versus warm season crops. The cool season are those that you can sow directly early, okay? And we're going to get approaching this relatively quickly. You got peas, spinach, lettuce, carrots, radishes, beets, cabbage, turnips, Swiss chard, broccoli, and cauliflower. All of these can typically be planted around St. Patrick's Day directly into the soil. Now, if it's muddy, if we've had snow and it's mud on March 17th on St. Patrick's Day, you're not going to go out and work in the garden. Don't go out and just make a giant muddy mess. This is assuming the soil is workable. Maybe you've already cultivated, you've already tilled it up a little bit, and it's workable. It could be moist, certainly moist, but not mud. I mean, you could plant in the mud, but that is not a fun experience. Don't do that. But some of these actually prefer the cooler soil temperatures around that time. The soil is workable, but the soil is cool. And these are cool season. You know what happens to these as the temperatures warm up. These crops don't love the heat. Although carrots and radishes and some of those, they're growing all summer. They're not certainly affected, cabbage and beets. But your peas, you know what happens to peas in the middle of summer? They just don't like it. They're done. You've harvested your peas and they're out, early by middle of June. Spinach, same thing. It'll bolt. Lettuce will bolt. It'll go to seed. So these are all early crops. I wouldn't bother trying to start these indoors, although and I know, you can buy broccoli starts and cabbage starts. And if you can certainly start these early, and then when the soil is workable, you can wait a little longer, then you can go transplant them. There's no problem with that. But a lot of the others, the Swiss chards, the lettuces and carrots and all those, spinach, just directly sow those in. You don't have to worry. The warm season crops, these are things you're going to start indoors, or you're simply just going to wait and direct seed. So corn, as I've already mentioned, you can buy corn starts, but I think it's just easier to direct seed it when the soil temperature's warmed up enough. Corn, beans, any of the squashes, you can buy squash starts, and you can start your own if you want that little jump start instead of just direct sowing and waiting for it to come up. I've done both. I honestly just prefer to just plant them directly in the ground at this point instead of trying to fight them in the windowsill and do all that. They come up fairly quickly. The temperatures of the soil is warm. I can plant them in the ground. There's plenty of time in our growing season here to still get the pumpkins you want, the watermelons, the zucchini. All those things have worked very well, just direct seeding into the soil. Peppers and tomatoes, the ones I have listed in blue, those are the ones that you probably want to just get a jump start on. You want those. And if you want to grow your own onions from seed, onions take a terribly long time. Start them on January 1st. After you've celebrated New Year's, break out your onion seeds and start them indoors because they take a very long time to be sizable enough to transplant outside. Or you just buy onion sets, separate them all out and plant those when you can. Um, if you, yeah, trying to do onions from seed just takes a very long time. Peppers, again, take a long time to germinate. So those are just a few of the warm season crops. And with and herbs, same thing. Most of the herbs, if you like herbs, we've got a whole separate class on herbs that we'll dive into each of these. These can be started indoors for the most part. Some herbs are actually perennial, so once you get them going, you won't have to start them every year. You know, your chives is kind of perennial plant, your parsley, some of the thyme varieties, rosemary, if you've got a hardy variety, the mints, the horseradish, all that's fairly much a fairly perennial type. Your basil, your cilantro, your garlics, and some of those. You'll start some of those every year if you want to. Garlic, you actually can plant those bulbs in the fall, and you can have those the next year. But we have a whole separate class on herbs. So I this there's so much to cover. We had an hour here. I do hope that you've learned, and we'll pause here for a second for questions. But the summary is use good seeds, and if you really have any doubts, buy some new ones. They're really not that expensive. A couple dollars, you've got a whole packet of seeds. Use good soil mix for germination. Provide the proper conditions as far as light, temperature, and airflow and moisture. Nutrition, you don't have to worry typically. These little seedlings, they don't need fertilizer at this point. You're going to do fertilization later. Once they're in the ground in your actual garden, then you worry about fertilization. But at this stage, your soil media, your little mix, it's going to have nutrients in there. So you don't have to typically worry about fertilizing. Unless, of course, the pot's really small and you have them indoors for an extended period where they're getting bigger. Then you may need to get a liquid type fertilizer, a water soluble fertilizer, and give them a little extra at that point. Harden them off properly, transplant the mature seedlings outside at the proper time and protect them, and you will be successful. So, with that, let's go to some questions. I really appreciate you joining us. Um, and if you're done, you don't have any questions, please come to our look, check our website, come back to see us again. We've got a lot of classes scheduled, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. So let me get to some of these that are still in here. There was a question about price. Does cheap price mean poor quality seeds, dollar store seeds? Not necessarily. Sometimes these companies will get bulk. They'll be able to go to a supplier and say, look, we're going to buy, a million packets of your seeds and distribute them all over the country. So you don't, not necessarily, cheap doesn't necessarily mean poor quality seeds. You may be limited on variety, but that's it. So another one, watering seedlings. If a container, let's see, if in a container you put water in the bottom of a tray with the soil, will the soil pull the water up through the holes in the bottom of the pot? It's a great question. The answer is typically yes. If the soil media is touching the water, and it'll wick that water up. Now, some people, and you've seen this probably with some other pots, some people will do that and they'll actually have a little string from, if you have your little pot here, let me actually stop sharing my screen so you can see this bigger. So you've got your little pot here. They'll actually put a piece of string in there. So the string comes up about to the top and then it extends out to the bottom. And that string is sitting in the water. That string acts like a little wick and it pulls water up. And it helps keep the soil fairly moist without keeping it too soggy to where you're drowning them. So yes, typically those soil medias, if they're wet to begin with, if they're dry to begin with, a lot of times it just doesn't, it's water, the properties of water and the cohesiveness, that layer is repelling water at first, but if it's it's moist to begin with, it'll typically kind of keep drawing water as it's evaporating from the top. So that's a great question. So let's see, do plants germinate in hydroponics? The aerial garden do well if transferred to soil outdoors. Typically, yes. They have those little aerial garden things and their little plugs. Yes, if once you get them germinated in there and they start growing, transplant them. Maybe transplant them first into a little bit bigger container, and then grow them up just a little bit bigger beyond that, and then you can harden them off and transplant them outside, just like we've talked about tonight. And they should work out very well. It should be just fine. What about LED lights? The question on LED lights. Yes, most of the grow lights I think now are probably LED. They look like fluorescent bulbs and they'll say grow light, but more and more the technology is leading to LED. A lot of times it doesn't. There are special grow lights. I've used just straight fluorescent lights. So LED lights, the idea is that the plant is taking a light, a photon, and it's using that to do its whole photosynthesis process. It's to create sugars and do its whole process. So it's really any light. Sunlight's actually the best because it has the full spectrum of all the colored light. But any light is going to be better than no light. So if you have LED lights, they're going to be energy efficient. They're going to be okay. They're going to work. Good question. So we've got another one that is, I purchased this last year. It's a Mars Hydro 1000 watt grow LED grow light. Um, Tried not to put my light too close, but fried my seedlings with a light this intense. What should my distance be? Okay, that's a good question too. If you have a more intense type light that maybe is extra bright or puts off a little extra heat, you're going to have to play with that. I'm not sure what the distance ideals should be. There may be some research on that somewhere. One of the extension universities, whatever, do some searching. But you may just have to play with that. Maybe you're 2 inches higher or 3 inches higher than you were, and it'll be the ideal distance. Maybe you're 6 inches higher. I wished I could give you an answer on that one, Lori, but I don't know for sure. You're going to have to either experiment or do a little, maybe get online, do a little asking, searching around to see if anybody else has had that experience and if they've found an ideal distance. In your experience, it says, what are the hard to kill vegetables? Good question. I've killed every, I've killed everything. So um, don't take it personal if you kill something, because some years you're just going to struggle with something. There are some weird things year to year that just sometimes things don't grow. Hard to kill vegetables, in my opinion. um, Radishes are hard to kill. They are easy to grow. Spinach you can easily grow. It doesn't seem like it's hard to kill. In my opinion, tomatoes are hard to kill, but that's just my opinion. My experience is I haven't been able to kill them, and I don't do a lot with them. I water them. I fertilize once. Usually when I'm outside, I fertilize one time a year and call it good. And things are good. I have a good soil. It's good loamy, average loose soil, so that does well. Um, but hard to kill. Well, I guess it depends on the color of your thumb, right? Everyone, oh, I've got a brown thumb. Maybe you can kill everything, and I would say if you just want to start with some medium, zucchini, in my opinion, is pretty hard to kill. Although I've had years where I can't grow it. Last year was one of those years. I had 2 zucchini plants, and I think we picked like 2 zucchinis off of 2 plants the whole year. So I'm sorry, that probably does not answer that question well, but um, I would stick with some of the main ones. Tomatoes, go with some spinach, some radishes. You could grow kale, you could grow Swiss chard. A lot of those things are super easy to grow, not easy to kill, and still good. Will I get an email about further classes? If you check the box upon registration that you were interested in being notified, then you'll get an email, you'll have newsletters. If not, just check back on our website. You can sign up for a monthly email newsletter that we send out. And so my email address is on my picture here on the screen. So if you can't find that on our website, send me an email. I will get it forwarded to the right person and we'll get you added to that email newsletter if you're interested in receiving more information about future classes and reminders and different things like that. Starting a new garden this year, any suggestions? That's a question that has a lot of stuff into it. If you've never done a garden before, um, actually, with this question, this is a really in-depth question. If you've never done this before, there's a lot to do. I would like to maybe just talk to you in person. If you'll send me an email with a phone number, I will call you back in the next day or two, and um, and then we can just talk about your space. You want to choose a space with good light. Ideally, you have a decent soil. It depends on how big you want your garden to be. If you want to go with raised beds and you have the means to build up a raised bed and fix some irrigation to that, that's a good alternative. But let's maybe have a more personal conversation about that. Send me an email with a phone number. I will call you. That's probably the best thing I can say to that one right now without really trying to figure out what you have and all the conditions there. How often do you fertilize throughout the season and what type do you use? I fertilize, ideally you're fertilizing, well, let me go back. If you, depends on your soil. If you know generally what your soil is like and you've never really had to worry about things growing, and then fertilize once a year. Use a good general garden fertilizer. I use just a triple 16 granular fertilizer and I mix it. I, I put it into the soil and mix it into the soil. Some people like to use a liquid fertilizer, and so they can hook it to their hose or they can mix it and then they go out and they fertilize their plants with a liquid fertilizer. I have found that just a general garden fertilizer, a granular fertilizer, triple 16, the numbers on the bag are 16, 16, 16, or 8, 8, 8, 10, 10, 10, triple whatever. That means you have the same amount of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, which covers all the basics of what you need for growing vegetables, and apply that a couple times a year is probably all you need. Once in the spring, and then maybe as you see things start to slow down a little, the heat of the summer can sometimes do some stress. You could do a light fertilization around in July to carry you through the harvest period, and then again in the spring when you've put the garden in. And if you have really poor soil, then you may want to bump up that fertilization schedule to once a month. But do it light, don't overdo it, because too much nitrogen, you get all green plants with no fruit. You don't want to burn your plants, so go lightly. Follow recommendations on bags and different things, and look at those resources on USU Extension. There's some fertilization on there too for different things. Some plants, your corn will like high nitrogen. Your tomatoes, they'll like enough nitrogen, but not too much, or you just have all vines. So get on that USU site and kind of look at some of those requirements so you'll kind of balance. You may not fertilize the full garden the same way, depending on where you've planted everything. All right, once you test the seeds to see if they germinate, can you plant the germinated seeds in pots? The answer is yes, certainly. You don't need to throw those away. They're germinated, they're starting to sprout. Just be really careful with them. Tuck them into that little pot. Get your little pot, tuck them in. They're already started to germinate, and so they're just going to grow. They'll send out some roots and they'll start growing right in that soil media, and off you go. So you've already kind of got a jump start. And you could actually do that every time. Depending on the size of the seed and everything, you may need to use some tweezers and carefully just stick that in. But certainly that's a great way to see if the seed's going to grow first and then get it into the soil if you have the time to do that. Which flowers go well with veggies? For example, marigolds go well with tomatoes. Yes, marigolds are supposed to be a repellent for certain bugs. I'm not the flower expert on the co-plant, that this combination of flowers with vegetables. There's several, and there are some publications. USU, I think, has one on your flowers with your veggies. I would just put flowers in there just for the color mostly. And if you use some cut flowers, then you cut them and you put them in a vase once in a while on your counter. So to me, any of the flowers, any of the annual cut flowers will work. But if you're really interested in the pest management flowers, I don't have that information right off. There are some publications about that we could help you find, or you could go on the USU Extension site and look something up there. So I hope that helped you. Starting to raise bed, do you only use a Miracle Grow or store-bought soil versus soil from your yard? The That's a great question. Raised beds, the one benefit to raised beds is you can totally control the soil media you put in it. So ideally, you don't just take all your regular garden soil and throw in it, because you may have you may have some problems in your soil. So you can control it. And a lot of people recommend just using a raised bed garden mix. I don't know that Miracle Grow is the brand you need. There's several brands out there. We've actually used in our demonstration garden, our learning garden in Layton, we use just the Miller's company. It's a local company in Cache Valley. We've used their raised bed mix, and it's been fantastic. It's worked great. Number one, it's loose, and so you don't have a seed source in there. You're not worried about weeds. It's not really dense and heavy, and you've eliminated a lot of soil problems right from the beginning by putting a good soil mix. You could mix a little bit of regular garden soil in there just to if it's too light for you, mix a little bit in there to increase the density a bit. But I would recommend maybe going with a do something new in there where you know what's going in, you know that there's a control on weeds and the nutrition level and everything else. And then once you do that, all you need to do is add compost every year to increase the fertility back to what it was, because it will deplete the nitrogen and the nutrients out of those soil mixes. So add compost back in every year. It adds the nutrients back in with a little bit of fertilizer and you're good. Hey, I want to try garlic. I know let's see, and I know I'll have to do it in the spring planting now, but when can I put them out? Do I need to wait past frost? Is it too early now? A lot of times you're planting those in the fall and they overwinter just fine. If they've been indoors, you might want to try to just harden them. And I'm not a garlic expert. I've never never grown garlic myself because I guess I just don't like it. But um, if you harden them just a little bit, they would probably be fine to put out now. Um, but if if you know what, send me an email on that too, and I will double check what I'm telling you. Like I said, I'm not a garlic expert, but I will find that out for you. So send me an email and just say, I asked the question about garlic. Type that question right back in an email for me, and we'll get you an answer so that you can be successful there. I'm sorry, I don't know right off. What if you have bad soil? I think I answered that question. If you have bad soil, you can amend your garden soil by adding compost or any organic matter to it. If it's other problems, if it's you're kind of stuck, then go with a raised bed and then you can control the soil. That's the only solution I have is try to amend what you have with organic matter, compost, leaves, grass clippings, anything you can mix into that that's organic will increase soil qualities. Otherwise, go with raised beds and control it all yourself. So I hope that's helped. How much food can I grow in a 4x8 raised bed? I don't know if I can tell you pounds of food, but you can grow a lot. You don't need to worry about rows. You can cram lots and lots of stuff in a 4x8 bed. You can grow sufficient for your entire family, I'm sure of it. If you love corn, corn's not ideal in a raised bed. Honestly, it's high nutrient, not a lot off for what you're actually growing in the space required and the nutrient required. But everything else, the viney things can trail off the side. Everything doesn't have to be in the bed. It's planted in the bed, but a lot of stuff trails off the side. So your pumpkin's off on the ground over here and watermelon over here or cucumbers. You can trellis some things up. You can get a lot of stuff in a 4x8 raised bed. It's a great question. And if you have limited space, that's a great way to do it because you don't have a lot of space between rows. You don't weed as much. It's up on the ground. You're controlling temperatures. You're controlling soil conditions. It's a great way to go. But I don't have a number for you as far as total quantity of food. You can get a lot. What about getting fertilizer from a feedlot? Cow pies? Yes, great nutrient. Make sure it's aged. The one downside is even though manure comes from a feedlot, you may still be introducing some weeds into your soil. And as long as you are comfortable with that and can manage that, manure, especially if it's free and it's aged, make sure it's at least been sitting somewhere for a year. If not, it's considered hot. It has a high level of ammonia and it'll burn your plants. It'll be too hot, too much nitrogen. But if it's aged, that chemistry has changed, just everything's balanced. You can mix that in. It's very great for adding into your soil, mixing it in. Um, Good source, but be aware possible seed source being introducing some new weeds into your garden. You're recommending getting soil tested. I didn't mention this, but yes, if you're concerned at all about that, USU Extension offers a soil test. It does cost. They will send you a soil sample kit with instructions. You send that back, they'll send it to their soil lab, and then they will send you a report that breaks down the soil properties, the chemistry of the soil, and recommendations for what you need to do to improve it. or with fertilization, with nutrients, with whatever it is. So if you're concerned at all about soils, it'll break down micronutrients as well. How much magnesium's in the soil, calcium's in the soil, all that stuff. Do a soil test through Utah State Extension, and that would help you know what you need to do to maybe improve the soil. All right, squashes, pumpkins grew nice, then things went south with growth. The leaves developed a white coloration, began to die. What caused that? It could have been, there's several little viral things, verticillium wilt. There are some viral issues. Yeah, pumpkins and squash related things too. Sometimes they'll just up and die, and it's the squash bugs. They suck on the vines, and so if it's discoloration, the crazy colors of yellows and stuff, that's usually a mosaic type virus, and it can affect them and kill them. Powdery mildew can affect them sometimes, but it's more of white. You'll kind of know that. But if they're just doing really healthy and all of a sudden they just look really wilted and they start dying, check for squash bugs. They will get in there, they reproduce like crazy, and they'll suck on the vines. They're just sucking the juices out of everything, and they can easily kill some of your viney plants within just days. You can have giant healthy plants, and then the next thing you know, they're dead. So watch for those. But the virus things, there's not a whole lot you can do about those. Once you have them, you just hope your plant lives. If not, you pull it out and you plant them in a different spot next year, or look for viral resistant varieties. They're starting to develop some varieties that are more resistant than others to some of those mosaic viruses. See, do you have to prune your seedlings as it grows to make it stronger? Not typically. Some people will do what they call tomato pruning. Well, they'll prune their tomatoes as it grows to thin it and structure it. I don't typically have time for that, and I never really engage in any sort of seedling pruning. There is some science to that, and there's documents about pruning vegetable plants, mostly tomatoes, maybe peppers. Um, I don't have a good answer. I've never done it, and I've had good success. Most people don't. I think if you're looking for a specific style of how to grow these things or spacing and getting it to a certain height and having it on a trellis and different things, you'd probably want to do some of those certain things. Most people just don't have the time, and you're still going to get a great crop off of all that stuff. So can I put compost in the compost bin directly into my garden? If it's been turned and if it's been properly composted, the answer is yes. You can just add that compost right in. It's ready to go if your compost has been composting. If it hasn't composted all the way, what will happen is you'll put it in your garden and then it continues to break down, and it'll actually take a little of the nitrogen that's available in the soil, and it's going to use that nitrogen in the breakdown process. Once everything's broken down, it'll free up nitrogen back into the soil. So for a little while, you might be depriving your plants of some nutrient, but once it's fully broken down, it'll release that again. So if you've got a good compost pile and you're moving it and you're stirring it regularly and actually making compost, it's ready to go right back into your garden. Another question. These are great questions. I appreciate all these questions. Do raspberry, blackberry, and strawberry bushes need to be planted in groups, or can they be planted alone? You can plant them alone. A lot of times you'll see raspberry rows or blackberry rows, but you can plant an individual plant of any of those. And it's going to be just fine. We've used different varieties of strawberries actually as a little ground cover in our garden. And so they're spread out, and over time they'll send out they'll send out the rhizome, the stolons, rhizomes and stolons, and anyway, they're growing and they'll spread, but you can certainly plant them alone and they'll do fine. There's no reason they need to be all grouped together. It's just people typically group them. They have their raspberry patch, their blackberry patch, strawberry patch. Um, so hopefully that helps you there. When you say add compost, do you have a preferred kind? Any anything that is well composted. This is any organic matter that is composted all the way. You can get compost from the landfill. If it's properly composted, all it is organic matter you're mixing into the soil that's going to add nutrients, or your soil mix, and it's high in nitrogen, it's loose, it's loamy, there's just nutrient there, and it's just any organic wood material, tree material, that's grass clippings, it's all been broken down sufficiently that now it has nutrient to put back out to the plants. Plants can take that nutrient that's in the compost. And so anywhere, you can buy it in bags, you can buy it at nurseries, you can buy it at the landfill. Um, Landfill compost, just be aware, it's shredded anything. It's shredded trees, it's shredded any green waste that's hauled there. They shred it all up and compost it, which isn't necessarily a problem. It could be old pallets for that matter. But when properly composted, it doesn't matter. It's all been broken down and it's ready to go. Slugs can eat squash plants right out in 2 days. That is true. Slugs can do a lot of damage to a lot of things in your garden. So if you have slug problems, earwig problems, there are some pesticides there, you can use those, or there's natural remedies to try to deal with some of those. Again, go to the IPM advisories. There's little tips, there's little things for organic methods versus pesticide methods for doing away with pests that will cause harm in your vegetable garden as you go. So I think that concludes some questions. I'm out of time. We really appreciate you joining us. I hope this has been beneficial. I know I wanted to show maybe more pictures. This jumpstart thing is really just about getting some seeds going, getting them started inside. You're going to get them germinated, and then you'll have the jumpstart because you'll be ready to go. If you don't want to bother with any of this stuff, but you still are thinking about your garden early, well, then you can wait and just go buy the starts. There's not a problem with that. And you can still get jump started early by just protecting them. Protect those plants as you get them in the ground early. The ones you buy from a nursery will already be hardened off. They're ready to go right into the garden. So if you're kind of leery, you just don't want to bother with all the seeds and all the starting and all that stuff, great. Still do a garden. Just wait a little longer, and then when they're available at the nursery, buy them, bring them home. I will warn you this, nurseries will start putting out tomatoes and they'll do sales in April. If you buy them in April and you want to put them in the garden, protect them. If you don't protect them, they will freeze, and maybe nurseries count on that because then they'll see you the next week and you'll be buying more. And maybe that's their business model. They love that, right? They want to see you again and they want your money. But otherwise, this is fun. To me, this is fun. You get some seeds started, you enjoy it. You enjoy it in the winter. It's February, it's blue or snowy or gray, whatever it is, wherever you are. And you can enjoy your little seedlings. You're playing in the dirt. Dirt to me is it's therapy. We're living in weird times. COVID has made it weird. But get in the dirt, get your fingers dirty, get the plants growing. You're going to enjoy it. So appreciate it. Thank you again. You've got my email address if you need it, and we'll look forward to seeing you again at our next one. So with that, we're going to be out. Join us again here in a couple weeks for pruning. We hope that, and that'll be a demonstration as well if you're interested. Well, it'll be a recorded demonstration, but a demonstration nonetheless, try to answer your questions. So thanks again, and everybody have a good night.